The West was a land of harsh truths, where life and death danced on the edge of a knife, and the sun could bake a man's hope to dust. But for Abigail Thornton, the greatest threat wasn't the sun or the drought. It was the roar of a man-made hell. Her world had shrunk to a prison of burning pine and canvas, the air thick with smoke and the screams of her own children. She was a mother, trapped and facing the unthinkable. And then through the shimmering curtain of heat and flame, a silhouette appeared, a dusty rider on a pale horse, an apparition of salvation, or just another phantom in the unforgiving blaze. The first thing to go was the smell of the prairie. The familiar scent of sagebrush and dry earth was devoured by the acrid stench of burning canvas and pine. Abigail Thornton coughed her lungs, seizing her eyes streaming as she tried to shield her children. 5-year-old Lily was a ball of terror, her small face buried in Abigail's skirt, her sobs lost in the roar. 8-year-old Samuel, trying so desperately to be the man of the family in his father's absence, stood frozen. His eyes went with a horror no child should ever witness. Their wagon, their home, their entire world was an inferno. Mama Samuel's voice finally broke a sharp crack of fear. The wheel's gone. He was right. The back left wheel, now a hub of angry glowing embers, had collapsed, tilting the wagon at a sickening angle. The flames which had started at the rear so fast, too fast to be an accident, had crawled up the canvas cover like a starving animal consuming it in seconds. Now they licked at the wooden sides, greedily reaching for the wagon's contents for them. They were pinned, the only exit a wall of fire. Abigail's mind raced a frantic scramble for a plan that wasn't there. They had been traveling for 3 days, heading west to the supposed sanctuary of Silver Creek, away from the troubles in dusty Abilene troubles that wore her husband's name, Caleb Thornton. Caleb with his charming smile and hands that were far too comfortable with a deck of cards. He had promised to meet them, sworn he had a new start waiting. But he wasn't here now. It was just her children, and the fire. The heat was a physical blow, blistering the skin on her face and arms. The wagon groaned, the sound of a dying beast. "Stay behind me," she ordered, her voice raspy, pulling her children tighter. She looked for a gap, a weakness in the flames, but there was none. They were boxed in, despair, cold and sharp, pierced through the haze of smoke. This was it. This was how their story ended, a forgotten tragedy on an empty plain. And then through the shimmering, distorted air, a figure emerged. He rode a buckskin horse that seemed almost ghostly against the black smoke. The man was a study in dust and leather, from his wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes to the worn cattleman boots. He wasn't riding fast, but with a steady, unnerving calm, as if assessing a stubborn steer rather than a life-or-death crisis. He pulled up just beyond the circle of heat, his horse stamping nervously. For a moment, he just watched. His face was unreadable, etched with the lines of too much sun and too many hard miles. A thick layer of trail dust couldn't hide the dark stubble on his jaw. He looked less like a savior and more like a vulture waiting for the inevitable. Abigail's flicker of hope died in her throat. He would just watch. He would ride on. But then he swung down from the saddle. He moved with a fluid grace that belied his rugged appearance, pulling the bandana from his neck and tying it over his nose and mouth. He unhooked a heavy canvas bedroll from behind his saddle. Without a word, without a glance in her direction that she could discern, he strode towards the fire. He didn't hesitate. He plunged the bedroll into the horse's water trough on the side of the wagon a desperate, sizzling sound erupting as the wet canvas met the burning wood. Steam and smoke billowed a choking cloud. He used the heavy, soaked blanket like a shield beating at the flames near the front of the wagon, forcing a path, a narrow, terrifying corridor through the fire. "Get the girl!" he yelled, his voice muffled by the cloth, but carrying the clear ring of command. Abigail didn't need to be told twice. She scooped Lily into her arms, the child clinging to her neck like a burr. "Samuel, hold onto my skirt and do not let go." She could feel the heat searing her dress as she scrambled towards the opening the stranger had made. Splinters of burning wood fell around them. The man stood like a rock, his back to them, holding the fire at bay with the smouldering bedroll. His shirt was singed, and she could see the muscles in his back tense with the effort. Now he shouted. Abigail half climbed, half fell from the wagon, landing hard on the dusty ground, Lily's weight knocking the wind from her. Samuel tumbled after her, coughing and gasping. She scrambled away, dragging her children with her, not stopping until the cool air felt less like a distant memory, and the roar of the fire was at her back. She turned her heart, hammering against her ribs, just in time to see the stranger leap clear. Seconds later, the wagon's main support beam gave way with a final explosive crack. The entire structure collapsed into a heap of raging fire, sending a shower of sparks into the twilight sky. The life they had packed into that wagon, the family Bible, Caleb's old guitar, the few coins she had sewn into a mattress, was now ash. They were alive. They had nothing. The stranger walked towards them, pulling the bandana from his face. His eyes, the color of faded denim, were fixed on her. They held no pity, only a grim, assessing light. He was younger than she first thought, perhaps in his early 30s, but he looked as if he'd lived a lifetime already. "You folks all right?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly drawl. Abigail could only nod, clutching her children. Lily had finally stopped crying and was now staring at the man with wide, curious eyes. Samuel, however, looked at him with pure, unadulterated hero worship. "You saved us, Mr. Samuel," said his voice filled with awe. The man's gaze softened for a fraction of a second as he looked at the boy. Just happened to be in the right place. He looked back at the pillar of smoke staining the purple sky. Or the wrong one. He scanned the horizon, his calm demeanor returning, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the landscape not like a traveler, but like a hunter. Or the hunted. "This fire," he said, turning back to Abigail, his question blunt. "Was it a stray spark from your cook fire?" Abigail shook her head, finding her voice. "We hadn't eaten." The fire started at the back. It was fast. The stranger's jaw tightened. He walked over to where the back of the wagon had been kicking at the scorched earth with the toe of his boot. He bent down, picked something up, and rolled it between his thumb and forefinger. He walked back and opened his hand. In his palm lay the unmistakable, oily, half-burnt remnants of a torch rag. "No, ma'am," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "This wasn't an accident. Somebody wanted you dead." He looked at her, his blue eyes seeming to pierce right through her, and for the first time Abigail felt a fear colder than the fire itself. The trouble she was running from had finally caught up. "My name's Jackson Ryder," the stranger said, though it sounded more like a confession than an introduction. "Looks like your trouble just became mine." The night offered no comfort. The fire died down to a malevolent, pulsing glow, a funeral pyre for Abigail's old life. The air grew cold with a swiftness that was uniquely of the plains, a stark contrast to the inferno that had nearly claimed them. Jackson Ryder. Jax, as he told Samuel to call him, had built a small, smokeless fire a safe distance away, using dried brush and skill that spoke of long nights spent under open skies. He'd given them what little he had, a canteen of water and a strip of dried jerky for each of them, which the children gnawed on with a quiet intensity. Abigail wasn't hungry. A hollow dread had settled in her stomach, a feeling far worse than any physical hunger. "Who would do this?" She asked the question, a whisper into the vast darkness. She wasn't really asking him. She was asking the uncaring stars. The universe. Jax didn't look at her. He was staring into the flames of their small fire, his expression shuttered. "You tell me, ma'am. Folks don't usually try to burn a woman and her kids out on the prairie for no reason." "Who are you running from?" His directness was unsettling. There was no gentle preamble, no polite evasion. It was the question of a man who knew that in the West the truth was a tool for survival, and lies were a luxury that got you killed. Abigail hesitated. To tell him the truth was to admit the full humiliating scope of her husband's failures. It was to burden this stranger who had already saved their lives with a danger that wasn't his to bear. But the burnt torch rag he'd found was proof that silence was no longer an option. "My husband," she began, her voice barely audible. "His name is Caleb Thornton. He likes to gamble. He told me he'd found us a new life in Silver Creek. A real stake this time. He sent me a wire to meet him there. And the folks he gambled with Jax prompted his gaze still fixed on the fire. They don't strike me as the forgiving type." A bitter laugh escaped Abigail's lips. "His name is Bartholomew Kane. He runs most of the less reputable businesses back in Abilene. Caleb swore he'd paid his debts. He swore it was all behind us." She finally looked at him, her eyes pleading for some kind of understanding. He promised. At the mention of the name Bartholomew Kane, Jax's head snapped up. A flicker of something recognition. Dread. Something dark crossed his face before he masked it. But Abigail saw it. "You know him?" she asked, her voice sharp with alarm. Jax tossed a twig into the fire, watching it spark and catch. "I've heard the name," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "A man like Kane casts a long shadow. If you're tied up with him, your troubles are bigger than a burned-out wagon." He finally met her gaze, and the casual calm was gone. In its place was a hard, chilling seriousness. "Kane doesn't send messages. He sends undertakers. They didn't mean to scare you. They meant to finish you." The blunt words hung in the air, terrible and true. Lily, who had fallen into an exhausted sleep with her head in Abigail's lap, whimpered. Samuel, still awake, moved closer to the fire, as if its meager warmth could ward off the evil Jax described. "What do we do?" Abigail asked the question, stripped of all pride. She was lost. Her map, her destination, her very reason for being on this trail was Caleb, and now everything connected to him was tainted with a mortal danger. Jax was silent for a long time. The only sounds the crackle of the fire and the lonely cry of a distant coyote. He looked at her, then at the sleeping Lily and the wide-eyed Samuel. Abigail could almost see the war happening behind his eyes, the drifter's instinct to ride on, to not get involved, battling with something else, something deeper. "Silver Creek is 2 days' ride from here, if you're pushing hard," he said at last. "I was heading that way myself." It felt like a lie, a convenience offered for her sake, but she didn't question it. We can't stay here. His men will likely circle back to make sure the job is done. We leave at first light. Abigail questioned a sliver of disbelief in her tone. You would do that? You don't know us? I know what I saw, he replied, his voice low. And I know the name, Bartholomew Kane. He stood up, stretching his tall frame. Get some sleep. I'll take the first watch. He moved away from the fire, his silhouette melting into the darkness at the edge of the camp. Abigail watched him go, a storm of emotions churning within her. He was a stranger, a dusty, taciturn cowboy who had appeared out of nowhere. Yet in a single evening he had shown more courage and honor than her husband had in years. She was placing her children's lives and her own into the hands of a man she didn't know, based on nothing more than a single, selfless act. It was a foolish gamble, the kind Caleb would make. But as she looked at the smoldering ruins of her wagon, she knew it was the only choice she had. The first rays of dawn painted the eastern sky in bruised shades of purple and orange. Jax had them moving before the sun had fully crested the horizon. He had rigged a seat for Lily in front of his own saddle, and Samuel, his face set with a grim determination, was perched behind him. Abigail walked alongside the buckskin horse, her feet already aching her heart, a leaden weight in her chest. Jax set a relentless pace. He didn't follow the main trail, but cut across the open country, using low ridges and dry creek beds for cover. He moved with a purpose that confirmed Abigail's suspicion. This was not a man aimlessly drifting. This was a man who knew how to disappear. He's looking for tracks, he explained once, pointing back the way they had come. Kane's men. They'll be looking for ours. The rockier the ground, the harder we are to follow. Ours bled into one another under the oppressive sun. The landscape was a monotonous canvas of brown and pale green. They spoke little. The silence was filled by the rhythmic clop of the horses' hooves and the whistle of the wind. Yet a strange connection was forming in that silence. When Samuel's head began to nod with exhaustion, Jax reached a hand back to steady him without a word. When Abigail stumbled on a loose rock, his arm shot out to catch her elbow, his grip firm and sure. They stopped midday in the sparse shade of a lone cottonwood tree. Jax shared more of his water and jerky. Why are you really helping us? Mr. Ryder. Abigail asked, the formality a thin veil over her need to understand. He took a long swallow from his canteen before answering. He looked out over the shimmering plains, his eyes distant. Let's just say I owe a debt. He said, his voice quiet. Not the money kind. The kind you can't ever fully repay. A long time ago, I wasn't where I was supposed to be. Someone paid the price for that. Tonight, I was. The cryptic words hung between them, a glimpse into a past he kept locked away. Before she could ask more, his eyes narrowed, his body going still. He was looking at something on the horizon. Abigail followed his gaze, but saw nothing but waving grass. What is it? She whispered. Smoke, he said, his voice tight. But not from a campfire. It's too thick. Too dark. He climbed a small rocky outcrop, his movements swift and silent. He shielded his eyes, staring intently for a full minute before sliding back down. The grim look was back on his face. It's a homestead, he said. Or it was. About 5 miles east of here. Right along the main trail we would have been on. Abigail's blood ran cold. Cain's men. They're not just following you, Jack said, his voice like flint. They're clearing the path, wiping out anyone who might have seen you pass, anyone who might help you. He looked at her, his blue eyes hard as diamonds. They know you survived the fire. The fragile hope she had been nursing withered and died. They weren't just running from a memory in Abilene. They were being actively, ruthlessly hunted. And the sanctuary of Silver Creek suddenly felt a lifetime away. The knowledge that they were being pursued by such ruthless men changed the nature of their journey. It was no longer a desperate flight. It was a calculated retreat. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every gust of wind sounded like the hoofbeats of approaching riders. Jax pushed them harder, his vigilance becoming a palpable force, a shield around their small, vulnerable group. They traveled late into the night, guided by a sliver of a moon. Jax finally called a halt in a narrow, rocky canyon that offered good cover. There would be no fire tonight. The risk was too great. The cold was biting, and Abigail huddled with her children, sharing a single saddle blanket Jax had given them. Lily was feverish, her small body trembling. Abigail held her close, humming a lullaby, the melody a fragile thread of comfort in the oppressive darkness. Samuel, though exhausted, refused to sleep. He sat near Jax, watching the man as he methodically cleaned his Colt Peacemaker by the faint moonlight. "You're good with that thing, ain't you?" Samuel asked, his voice, a boy's whisper, trying to sound like a man's. Jax didn't look up from his work. "Good enough," he replied, the click of the cylinder spinning a sharp, metallic sound in the quiet. "My pa, Caleb, he had a pistol, a Schofield. He said it was the best gun a man could have, but he never let me touch it." Jax paused, sliding a cartridge into a chamber. "A gun isn't a toy, kid. It's a tool, and it's got a heavy price for every time you use it." He looked over at Samuel, his expression serious. "Best hope you never have to learn how to be good with one." The conversation, as simple as it was, sent a chill down Abigail's spine. It was a reminder of the world they now inhabited, a world where a man's worth was often measured by his speed with a firearm, a world her husband had dragged them into. In the small satchel she had managed to grab from the wagon, just before escaping the one containing a change of clothes for the children and a few personal items, her fingers brushed against a small oilskin-wrapped packet. It was the last thing Caleb had given her before she left Abilene. "Don't open this, Abby," he had said, his eyes shifting nervously. "Just keep it safe. It's our future. Give it to me when you get it to Silver Creek." At the time, she had assumed it was money, or perhaps the deed to the property he claimed to have bought. Now a sick feeling told her it was something far more dangerous. Driven by a sudden, desperate need for the truth, she waited until the children were finally asleep. Jax was sitting on a rock nearby, a silent sentinel watching the canyon entrance. "Jax," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. He turned his head. "Ma'am." She pulled the packet from her satchel. "My husband gave this to me. He told me it was important." Her fingers fumbled with the string binding the oilskin. I think I need to know what I'm carrying." He watched her, his face impassive in the gloom, as she unwrapped the packet. It wasn't money. It was a folded piece of parchment, brittle with age. She carefully unfolded it. Even in the poor light, she could make out the intricate lines and symbols. It was a map. But more than a map, it was a legal claim. The heading at the top was clear: assay and deed of title for the serendipity silver lode. A name was scrawled at the bottom, a signature of ownership, Bartholomew Kane. Abigail felt the air leave her lungs. It was as if she were holding a venomous snake. "Oh, God," she breathed. Jax was beside her in an instant, taking the parchment from her shaking hands. He angled it to catch the moonlight, his eyes scanning the document. A low curse escaped his lips. "Your husband didn't just owe Kane money," he said, his voice a low, furious growl. "He stole from him, stole the one thing a man like Kane values more than gold." What is it, she asked, though she already knew. "It's a deed, a silver mine, a big one by the looks of this assay report. This isn't about a gambling debt anymore, Abigail. This is about a fortune. Kane won't stop. He'll tear the whole territory apart to get this back." He folded the deed carefully and handed it back to her. "This is why he wants you dead. No witnesses, no loose ends." The truth was a brutal blow. Caleb hadn't been running from a debt. He had been running with a prize, using his own family as unwitting mules to transport his stolen goods. He had lied about everything. The new start, the paid debts, the safety of Silver Creek. It was all a fabrication, a web of deceit that now had them hunted and marked for death. Abigail felt a surge of white-hot anger, a rage so pure it momentarily eclipsed her fear. Anger at Caleb for his selfishness, his recklessness. Anger at herself for believing him, for wanting to believe him. Before she could process the revelation, a sound cut through the night, the clatter of a dislodged stone from the ridge above them. Instantly, Jax was on his feet, his Colt seeming to leap into his hand. "Get the children," he hissed. "Stay low, and don't make a sound." He moved to the edge of their shallow alcove, pressing his back against the rock wall, peering into the darkness. Abigail's heart hammered against her ribs. She shielded her sleeping children with her body, her hand over Samuel's mouth to keep him from crying out if he woke. A man's voice drifted down from above, rough and impatient. "See anything?" "Frank." "Nothing but shadows," another voice replied. "You sure that rider came this way?" "We lost his trail back at the creek. Kane said he was a ghost. Said to be careful. Let's check the wash down below and circle back. If they're on foot, they can't have gotten far." The voices faded as the men moved on. Abigail stayed frozen, every muscle tensed. Jax remained perfectly still for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he gave a low whistle, the signal that it was clear. That was too close, he breathed, holstering his pistol. The casual drifter was gone completely, replaced by a man of chilling competence. The way he held the gun, the way he moved, the way he listened, it was second nature to him. "You've done this before," Abigail stated, her voice flat. "This life. Running, fighting." He didn't deny it. He walked back and looked down at her and the children, his face a mask of grim resolve. "My name isn't the only thing I've been running from. I used to wear a star. In Kansas, I was a deputy." Abigail stared at him, stunned. "A lawman?" "I was young," he continued, his voice hollow with memory. "Thought I could save the world. There was a bank robbery. A gang not unlike Kane's." I hesitated. Just for a second. A teller, a young woman with a family, was killed because of it. I turned in my badge that day, and I've been riding ever since, trying to outrun the ghost of that girl. He looked at Abigail, and for the first time she saw the full weight of the burden he carried, the debt he'd mentioned. When I saw that wagon burning, he said, his voice thick with emotion, when I saw you and your children. I couldn't ride away. I won't fail again. In that moment, in the cold, dangerous dark of the canyon, Abigail understood. They were two sides of the same coin. She was running from a future destroyed by a faithless man. He was running from a past destroyed by a single moment of failure. And here, on this desolate patch of ground, their paths had converged. "We have to get to Silver Creek," she said, her voice filled with a new hard-won resolve. She clutched the stolen deed in her hand. This piece of paper was the cause of her misery, but it might also be her only leverage, her only way out. Caleb has to answer for this. He has to face what he's done. Jax nodded, his eyes meeting hers in the darkness. "He will," he promised. "But first we have to get there alive." Silver Creek was not the sanctuary Abigail had imagined. It wasn't the bustling, prosperous town Caleb had described in his letters. It was a raw, dusty settlement, clinging precariously to the side of a mountain. Its lifeblood, the promise of the very silver that had brought them so much pain. The main street was a river of mud from a recent rain, lined with a handful of false-fronted buildings, a saloon, a general store, an assayer's office, and a hotel that looked more like a glorified barn. They arrived late in the afternoon, looking like specters from the wilderness. Jax's horse was lathered and exhausted. Abigail's dress was torn and caked with dirt, her face gaunt. The children were silent, their eyes wide as they took in the rough, noisy town. Men with pistols on their hips stopped and stared, their gazes lingering on Abigail with a mixture of curiosity and predatory interest. "First thing is to get you folks a room," Jax said, his voice low, his hand resting almost unconsciously on the butt of his Colt. "Somewhere to be safe. Then we find your husband." The name of the hotel was the Prospector's Rest, a name far grander than the establishment itself. Jax paid for a room with 2 of his last few coins, insisting on one at the back, with a window that overlooked a dirty alleyway rather than the main street. "Fewer eyes this way," he muttered. The room was small and smelled of stale whiskey and unwashed linen, but it had 4 walls and a lock on the door. To Abigail it felt like a palace. While she washed the children's faces in a basin of murky water, Jax went to make inquiries. "I'll be back," he said, pausing at the door. His eyes, full of a protective warmth she was beginning to rely on, met hers. "Lock this behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me." She nodded, her heart thumping a nervous rhythm. Alone in the room, the reality of their situation crashed down on her again. Here she was, in a strange town, waiting to confront the husband who had betrayed them all while being hunted by a ruthless killer. Her only ally was a man she'd known for 2 days, a man with as many ghosts as she had. An hour passed, then 2. Lily fell asleep on the lumpy bed, and Samuel sat by the window peering down into the alley. With every creak of the floorboards in the hall, Abigail's body tensed. Finally, a soft, specific knock came at the door. 3 quick taps, then 2 slow ones, the signal Jax had arranged. She slid the bolt and opened the door. Jax stood there, his face grim. "I found him," he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him, where Abigail breathed. "Is he all right?" Despite her anger, a part of her still clung to the hope that there was a reasonable explanation, a misunderstanding. "He's all right," Jax said, his voice laced with contempt. He's over at the Gilded Cage Saloon, playing poker. The word struck Abigail like a physical blow. Poker. While his family was nearly burned alive while they trekked across the plains, fearing for their lives, Caleb was playing cards. The last vestiges of her hope for him crumbled into dust. He's been here for over a week, Jax continued, his voice hard. Telling everyone his name is Alonzo. Flashing a lot of cash buying drinks, telling big stories about a silver strike he's about to close on. He's not waiting for you, Abigail. He's hiding. Tears of fury and heartbreak welled in Abigail's eyes. I want to see him. It's not safe, Jax argued. Kane's men could be anywhere. I don't care, she said, her voice steely. He will not do this to us. He will not destroy our lives and walk away to play cards. I am going to face him. You have the deed. You keep it safe. But I am going to see my husband. Jax saw the unyielding resolve in her eyes and finally nodded. All right. But I'm going with you. Samuel, you stay here with your sister. Bolt the door and don't open it for any reason. Understand? Samuel nodded, his young face a mask of worry. The Gilded Cage Saloon was thick with smoke, sweat, and the tinny sound of a poorly played piano. Rough-looking miners and prospectors crowded the bar. In a back corner, at a table littered with coins and cards, sat Caleb Thornton. He looked different. He was wearing a new fancy vest, and his hair was slicked back with pomade. He laughed at something another player said, leaning back in his chair with an air of careless confidence. He looked up as Abigail and Jax approached, his smile faltering as he recognized her. For a second, a flicker of panic crossed his face before he composed himself. Abby, he said, his voice a smooth, practiced balm. He stood up, but he didn't move towards her. What are you doing here? I wasn't expecting you for another few days. His eyes darted to Jax, a flicker of suspicion in their depths. Who's this? This is the man who saved your family's lives, Abigail said, her voice shaking with suppressed rage. While you were here playing games. The other men at the table fell silent, watching the unfolding drama with keen interest. Caleb's face darkened. Keep your voice down, he hissed, grabbing her arm. Let's talk outside. He led them out a side door into the muddy alley. The moment they were alone, his charming facade dropped. Are you trying to get us all killed? He snarled. What is he doing with you? He pulled your children from a burning wagon. Caleb, a wagon set on fire by Bartholomew Kane's men. Abigail's voice rose shrill with pain. They left us for dead. Caleb paled. Kane. He found you. He looked around nervously, as if Kane himself might materialize from the shadows. The deed. Do you have it? Is it safe? That was his first question. Not about his children, not about her. About the deed. So it's true, Abigail said, her voice dead. You stole it. I didn't steal it, he insisted, his voice a desperate whisper. I won it, fair and square. Kane tried to cheat me, and I outsmarted him. It's mine. Our future. Our future. Abigail laughed, a harsh, broken sound. Our future is a pile of ash on the prairie. Our children nearly died because of your greed. I told you to be careful. He shot back, his fear making him cruel. This is your fault for being so careless. Jax, who had been silent until now, took a single step forward. He didn't say a word, but his presence was a physical threat. Caleb flinched back from him. "Give me the deed." "Abby." Caleb pleaded, his tone shifting again, becoming wheedling. "I have a buyer, a man here in town. Once I sell it, we'll have enough money to disappear. We can go to California, start over for real this time. We just need the deed." It was then that Abigail saw him for what he truly was. Not a flawed man, not a charming rogue, but a coward. A hollow man, driven by nothing but his own selfish desires. He would sacrifice anyone, even his own family, to save himself. "No," she said the word as cold and hard as stone. Caleb's face twisted in disbelief, then rage. "What do you mean, no?" "It's mine." "You have no right." "I have every right," she retorted, her grief finally forging into unbending strength. The right of a mother who protected her children when their father abandoned them. "You will not endanger them again." From the end of the alley, a new voice cut through the tension, slow and menacing. "He's right, you know. It is mine." All three of them froze. Standing there, silhouetted against the light of the main street, were three men. In the center was a large, imposing figure in a black duster coat. He was impeccably dressed, a stark contrast to the grime of Silver Creek. Even from a distance, Abigail could see the cold, reptilian gleam in his eyes. She didn't need an introduction. It was Bartholomew Kane. "Caleb Kane," said a predatory smile spreading across his face. "You have been a very difficult man to find, and it seems you've brought some friends." His eyes swept over Abigail, then settled on Jack's with chilling intensity. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Caleb made a small, terrified sound. The trap had been sprung. Their supposed sanctuary had become a pool, and the devil himself was standing at the door. The alley suddenly felt as small as a coffin. Bartholomew Kane took a slow step forward, his two hired guns fanning out slightly to his sides, their hands hovering over their holsters. Kane's smile never reached his cold, dark eyes, which were fixed on the stolen deed that he knew was the reason for this whole sordid affair. "I'm a reasonable man," Caleb Kane said, his voice deceptively calm. "All this unpleasantness, the fire, the chase, it can all be forgotten. Just give me my property, and you and your family can walk away." Caleb, drenched in a cold sweat, looked frantically from Kane to Abigail. "Abby, give it to him." He pleaded, his voice a desperate squeak. "Just give it to him." "The deed isn't here," Jack said, his voice steady and low. He had subtly shifted his position, placing himself slightly in front of Abigail, creating a shield with his own body. His hands were loose at his sides, but Abigail could see the tension in his shoulders. He was a coiled spring. Kane's eyes narrowed, shifting his full attention to Jack's. "And who might you be, the Good Samaritan?" He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "I've found that men who get involved in things that aren't their business often end up with shorter lives. I'll ask you once. Where is my deed?" "It's safe," Jax replied evenly. "And it'll stay that way. You'll let the woman and her husband go. Then we can talk." Kane's smile vanished. "I am not here to negotiate. Frank Dexter. It seems our friend needs some persuasion. Start with the husband. I find that cowards are often the most vocal." One of the thugs, a burly man with a scarred face, grinned and started towards Caleb. Caleb stumbled backward, his face a mask of pure terror. "No, wait," he shrieked. "She has it." She has it on her. Abigail's heart froze. In his terror, Caleb had signed her death warrant. Cain's gaze snapped to her. "The woman, then. Be gentle. I only want the paper." In that split second, everything slowed down. Abigail saw the thug lunge towards her. She saw Caleb cringe against the wall, a picture of pathetic cowardice. And she saw Jax move. He wasn't just fast. He was a blur of motion, an explosion of controlled violence. Before Cain's man could lay a hand on Abigail Jax's fist, connected with his jaw in a crack of bone, the man crumpled. Simultaneously, Jax's other hand was already drawing his Colt. The second thug, Dexter, was reaching for his own weapon, but he was a lifetime too late. The alley erupted with the deafening roar of Jax's peacemaker. A flash of orange, a puff of smoke, and Dexter was thrown backward against the saloon wall, a dark stain blossoming on his chest before he slid to the muddy ground. It had taken less than 2 seconds. 2 men down. Cain hadn't moved. He stared at the scene, not with surprise, but with a newfound chilling respect in his eyes. He slowly unbuttoned his duster, revealing a finely crafted silver-inlaid Remington pistol. "So Cain," said his voice, dangerously soft. "The drifter has a past. I should have known." Jax kept his pistol trained on Cain, his eyes like ice. "It's over, Cain. Walk away." "It's never over," Cain replied. And then Caleb made his final, fatal mistake. Seeing his chance with Cain and Jax locked in a standoff, he made a desperate scramble to run. He didn't run towards his wife. He ran for the alley's exit for his own skin. "Get him!" Cain snarled, momentarily distracted. It was the opening Jax needed. He fired not at Cain, but at the ground near his feet. The shot was a warning, a punctuation mark. But in that same instant, Cain, a veteran of 100 such brutal encounters, would have turned fire. The world seemed to explode some sort told. A bullet tore through the wood of the wall just inches from Abigail's head. Jax shoved her hard, sending her stumbling back into a recess by the door. Caleb, in his panicked flight, ran directly into the path of Cain's second shot. He stopped dead, a look of stunned surprise on his face. A small, dark hole appeared on his new fancy vest. He looked down at it, then up at Abigail, his eyes wide, with a final, silent question. Then he collapsed face first into the mud, the coins from his pockets scattering around him. Abigail let out a choked cry, a sound of horror and a strange, hollow grief. The momentary distraction was all it took. Cain, seeing his prize target fall, now focused all his murderous intent on Jax. He fired again. Jax grunted as a bullet ripped through his left shoulder, spinning him around. His pistol clattered to the ground. Cain smiled a true triumphant smile this time, and took aim for the killing shot. No. Abigail screamed. Driven by pure instinct, she did the only thing she could. She lunged for Jax's fallen gun. Her fingers closed around the cold, heavy steel. She had never fired a gun in her life, but she had seen Jax. She had seen them all. She raised the heavy weapon with both hands, the barrel shaking wildly, and pointed it at the dark shape of Bartholomew Cain. Cain hesitated, his eyes widening in surprise at the sight of the determined, terrified woman aiming a peacemaker at his heart. That hesitation cost him everything. Abigail squeezed the trigger. The recoil was a brutal shock, slamming her shoulder back. The roar was deafening. But down the alley, Bartholomew Kane shuddered. He looked down at his chest, a mirror image of the wound that had killed Caleb's hopes. His fine duster was ruined. He looked up, his eyes filled with disbelief. Then he toppled backward and was still. Silence descended on the alley, thick and heavy, broken only by the tinny piano music still drifting from the saloon and Abigail's own ragged gasps. She stood there, the heavy pistol still clutched in her hands, smoke curling from its barrel. She looked at the bodies, the two thugs, her husband, and the man who had haunted their lives, all lying still in the mud. Then she dropped the gun and rushed to Jax. He was leaning against the wall, his face pale, his hand clamped over the bleeding wound on his shoulder. "Jax!" she cried, her hands fluttering uselessly around him. I'm all right," he grunted, though his face was slick with sweat. "Just a scratch." It was a clear lie. The wound was serious. Doors were opening along the alley. Men were shouting from the main street, drawn by the gunshots. A crowd was gathering. Abigail knelt beside him, tearing a strip from her petticoat to press against the wound. "You saved us," she whispered. Tears finally streaming down her face. Tears of fear, of grief, of a profound and overwhelming relief. He looked at her, his blue eyes hazy with pain, but holding a deep, unwavering sincerity. "No, Abigail," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "You saved us." He glanced at the carnage around them, at the body of Caleb, and then back to her. "You are free. In the bloody, muddy alley of Silver Creek, surrounded by death." Abigail Thornton finally was. She was no longer running from her husband's ghosts, or from a predator like Cain. The reckoning had come paid for in dust and blood, and she had survived. The aftermath of the shootout was a maelstrom of chaos that slowly settled into a grim, orderly process. The town marshal, a portly, world-weary man named Fenton, arrived with 2 deputies, their expressions a mixture of alarm and resignation. Gunfights in Silver Creek weren't unheard of, but one that left 4 men dead in an alley, including the infamous Bartholomew Kane, was another matter entirely. Abigail, her hands still trembling, told the story. She left nothing out: the fire, the chase, the stolen deed. Caleb's betrayal, Cain's ultimatum, Jack's. His shoulder bandaged by the town doctor corroborated every word his testimony, delivered in short, factual sentences. The discovery of the deed to the serendipity load on Abigail, and the fact that Cain and his men were wanted criminals from Kansas to Colorado, quickly turned the tide of official opinion in their favor. By morning it was ruled self-defense, a justifiable if bloody end to a violent saga. Abigail spent the night in a chair beside Jax's bed in the doctor's small infirmary. The children, blessedly unaware of the night's full horror, had been taken in by the marshal's wife, a kind, stout woman who clucked over them like a mother hen. In the quiet of the pre-dawn hours, Jax stirred. "Abigail," he rasped. She was by his side in an instant, offering him a cup of water. "I'm here." He drank, then leaned back against the pillows, his face pale in the lamplight. "Caleb," he started, then stopped. "I know," she said, softly, understanding what he couldn't say. There was grief, but it was a complicated, hollow thing. She grieved for the man he should have been, for the marriage she had thought she had for the father her children had deserved. But she did not grieve for the coward who had tried to trade her life for his own. He made his choices a long time ago. Jax looked at her, his gaze searching her face. "What will you do now?" It was the question that hung over everything. The deed to the Serendipity mine, ironically, was now legally hers. Caleb had stolen it, but Cain's death and the marshal's ruling had made her the de facto owner of the claim that had caused so much bloodshed. It was a fortune, a path to a new life anywhere she wanted. San Francisco, Boston, a world away from the dust and violence. I don't know, she admitted. She thought of packing up, of taking her children and running again, but the thought of it exhausted her. She was tired of running. She spent the next 2 days making arrangements. Caleb was buried in the town's small, windswept cemetery in a simple pine box. It was a quiet affair, attended only by her, the marshal and the preacher. As she stood over the fresh grave, she felt not sadness but a profound finality. That chapter of her life was over. She found she had no desire to leave Silver Creek. The town was rough, but the people, the marshal's wife, the doctor, even some of the gruff miners who now tipped their hats to the woman who faced down Bart Kane, had shown her a kindness she hadn't expected. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't an outsider. This town, born of raw hope and struggle, felt like a place where someone could forge a new beginning. It felt real. On the 3rd day, Jax was cleared by the doctor to travel. Abigail found him by the corral, checking the saddle on his buckskin horse. Her heart sank. He was leaving. The drifter was drifting on. "You're heading out," she said, stating the obvious. He nodded, not looking at her. "My work here is done. Debts are paid." "Where will you go?" He shrugged, adjusting a strap. "Don't know. West, I suppose. There's always more west." The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words. He had saved her life, her children's lives. He had shown her what true honor looked like. The thought of him riding away, becoming just a memory, was a pain sharper than she had anticipated. "Jax." She began, her voice quiet but firm. "The Serendipity claim. It's a real mine. There's silver there. A lot of it. I can't work it alone." He finally stopped and turned to face her. "You can hire men, a foreman. You don't need me. That's not what I mean," she said, her gaze steady. "I'm staying. Here. In Silver Creek. I'm going to build a life for my children. A real one on solid ground. Not one built on lies or running away." She took a breath. "But I don't want to do it alone. I'm offering you a job. A partnership. Stay. Help me build it." It was more than a job offer. It was a plea. A hope. He looked at her, at this woman who had survived fire and betrayal and had found the strength to face down a killer. He saw the mother, the survivor, the quiet force of will that had been forged in the crucible of the past week. He looked past the town towards the endless horizon that had been his only companion for so long. For the first time, it didn't look like freedom. It looked lonely. A slow smile touched the corners of his mouth, a genuine smile that reached his faded denim eyes and erased the years of hardship from his face. "Well, ma'am," Jackson Ryder said, his voice a low, warm drawl. "I've never been much of a miner, but I reckon I could learn." He uncinched his saddle. He wasn't riding away. Not today. For Abigail, watching him lead his horse towards the town stables instead of the open trail, it felt like the first true sunrise she had seen in years. The sky was vast and blue, full of promise, and for the first time, she was ready to face the dawn. That's the tale of Abigail Thornton and the dusty rider named Jax. A story not just of survival against fire and bullets, but of the discovery of strength in the deepest despair. It's a reminder that sometimes the family you choose is forged in the most unexpected flames, and that true courage isn't about the absence of fear, but about acting in spite of it. The West was full of stories that ended in unmarked graves, but this one ended with a new beginning. If this story of courage, betrayal, and redemption out on the lonely plains moved you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who loves a classic tale of the West. And most importantly, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, so you won't miss our next story from the annals of history and legend. Thank you for listening, and until next time, may your trails be safe and your campfire warm.